everybody for chiming in. My name is Jeff Waldman. I'm the founder of Scale HR, and we are doing a fantastic webinar today called Hiring Without Borders, How to Access Global Talent Pools. And so I have an excellent guest with me, Alan Price, who is the global head of TA at Deel. So Deel is actually one of my partners. And so this call is being recorded. We also have Gemini working at Magic in the background, and we will be sending out all of the slides, recording, as well as any action items after this webinar is finished. And so if you haven't done so already, please chime into the chat, mention where you're calling in from. Okay, so once again, welcome. We're going to get rolling here. All right. So as I mentioned, Deel, I partnered with Deel on the webinar. And so for those of you, who don't know who Deel is, which you probably do, they are a global HR and payroll platform. And they serve, over 150 countries globally. And it's a fantastic tool, fantastic company platform. So we work with them quite a bit. And I'm the founder of Scale HR. I have a brand new website launching next month. Don't go there now, but we basically work with, up and coming HR tech companies to help them with brand awareness and lead generation. And so we help them cut through all of the noise. I'm based in Toronto. I'm Canadian. Then we work with a lot of different firms, companies, globally. So I want to welcome everyone here. So as I mentioned, so I'm Jeff. We have Alan Price here, who's the global head of TA from Deel. You may see a cute little child come into the background of Alan's. That's his daughter. We do encourage pets and kids to also come onto the webinars as well. So you may see her from time to time. Right. Just a little housekeeping. So as I mentioned, the webinar is being recorded. We are using Gemini for some notes. There's also the chat feature. You can share your comments and thoughts. There's a Q&A feature as well. So we're going to be getting into some questions later on. And if you want to ask questions, please just drop them into the Q&A, and we'll get Alan to tackle those, during that session also. As I mentioned, I'll share the slide with everybody after this webinar is finished, as well as I'll just send an email to everybody as well with the post webinar reach out and some content. Okay. And we are taking a bit of a different approach today. It's a bit of a hybrid webinar and fireside chat structure. And so you'll be hearing from me for the first part, and then we're going to get into more of a conversational structure with Alan. And so we're really breaking it down into three sections. One is setting the context. I think it's really important. There's a talent crunch. And I think it's really important that we talk about some data points. And then we'll get into AI, because that's really changing the landscape, especially when it comes to global hiring. And then we'll get into some other things around borderless hiring and change management, some things that people have to really take note of. And then we'll get into a QA and then a very short closing. So that's the agenda. All right. So there's a little QR code down here. I mean, if you're interested in learning more about Deel, scan the QR code. Can speak to one of their sales reps. This QR code will be on all of our following slides. And so setting the context, the talent crunch. So as I talked about, a lot of companies out there globally are really having a difficult time, filling jobs. And this is a more generic stat, so 75%. I didn't break it down by type of role, but generally speaking, this is across the board. And so, which is one of the reasons why the global hiring phenomenon has actually taken off, is because it opens up your borders and talent pool from your own home country or home city to a global audience. This is really interesting. So I've spent a lot of time in tech. So there's 85 million tech jobs may go unfilled by 2030. That equates to $8.5 trillion US in revenue by law. So that's a spelling typo. Sorry about that. So that's huge. That's massive. And I don't know if it'll be that high, but that just goes to show that there is a massive challenge that we're up against. And so I think it's important to really understand these things, because a sense of urgency always encourages action. And so I think it's really important that we set that context. So, I mean, this has been true for quite some time. Old school sourcing strategies don't work anymore. But I just wanted to make this point, because it's more obvious and prevalent now today than ever before. So if you are still doing things the old way, I really strongly encourage you to think about how you can change that. So this is a very complicated slide. There's a lot going on here. But the idea here is that, I've worked with a lot of different regions around the world, and, Alan has as well. And obviously, when you're hiring globally, there are different parts of the world that may have strengths, may have opportunities and challenges. And so this is a very high level snapshot, really. When you're looking at the different regions, there are countries and regions that are really starting to emerge. Whether it be like Latin America, obviously with, software engineering and customer support type role. Like I've done a lot of hiring in places like Brazil, and places like that. So strong like English capability. And then there's also like the time zone thing. So I mean, if you're in North America, there's 5 time zones here in Canada. So when we look at global hiring, that time zone overlap is actually really important. Africa also is about an up and coming region. It's more of a Saharan, so below the northern African countries. And so I think we have someone here from Egypt, which I guess isn't really part of Africa, but it's sort of just below that line. So there's a lot of population growth there, and they're educated. And so Africa is starting to, especially Nigeria, which is somewhere where I've done some work in as well. And then Southeast Asia, Philippines seems to be a country that I've done a lot of work in as well. And that really is a very educated customer support offshoring type of talent pool there. A lot of my fellow peers that own small businesses work with a Philippine talent to run their businesses. So that's becoming a huge thing. Eastern Europe, obviously, heavy tech, very, very strong in math, data science and so on. And so Ukraine, even with with the war, there was amazing talent there from a freelance perspective. I've worked with many Ukrainian talent that may not be working there. They might be elsewhere, maybe in Poland and others. And then obviously India, which has been a long-standing region. So just the idea here is to show that there's a great variety and there are opportunities in all these different parts of the world. And so, obviously getting into the nitty-gritty of what they're strong in and then how to find those people is the biggest challenge. So some of the questions are, well, why? Like, why would you do this? And so obviously I mentioned some of these things. I think it comes down to 4 key things. Obviously, broader access to skilled talent. I mean, going global is a much bigger audience, and just focusing on, say, Canada, which is only 41 million person population country. Cost, depending on where you sit. Obviously, if you're based in Canada, US, labor is very expensive, and so oftentimes, going to other countries may actually save you a lot of money without compromising quality of talent, obviously. And then I think the third one is really around diversity of thought. So I mean, think about it. I mean, if you're like an Airbnb, for example, and you serve multiple countries and you're able to quickly tailor user experience features really quickly and then effectively to those different regions, you get better adoption. So I could never, recommend features that might be relevant to the Indian marketplace or the Egyptian marketplace or wherever, because I'm not from there. I don't have those skill sets. So that's something that a lot of global companies are really thinking about. And I think the last one is really faster hiring cycle. As an example, there's a company, Deel, they go to Africa and Latin America. They can hire a software engineer in under 21 days versus in the US, it might be 60 days plus. And that's a function of, supply and demand of talent, bureaucracy, processes, and so on. Shortening, obviously, from 60 down to 21 is a huge saving. These are some of the reasons why you would do it. And, obviously, I think those companies that, as we'll get into with Alan, that have actually embraced it, have seen a lot of benefits. Once again, put your comments in the chat. Question. I'm going to launch a poll. So very, very quickly, is your organization hiring outside of your based home country currently? I'm just going to launch it. Just bear with me. All right, here we go. Give you a couple seconds. Here's the poll. Question is your organization hiring outside your base or home country? There's 3 answers. I hope you can see the poll. Yes, actively hiring. No, but exploring it. No, and I'm not even going to venture into that category. So I'll try to get a more responses here. But I'd be interested to hear from those companies that are not really considering it as to why. Is it something that sort of preventing you from exploring it? All right. So the idea, I mean, this will really segue really nicely into our next session. Is really to the meat of it. So I've set the context very quickly. I think AI, which has obviously been a big part of our world for the last couple of years, and this is really where I want to get into a conversation with Alan. Alan, does a ton of work in this area. And so, Alan, I just want to welcome you here. First of all, you've been relatively silent so far. I haven't seen your daughter cross the background yet. So do you want to just tell everybody what you do?
Yeah, thanks for hosting me, Jeff. So in terms of kind of AI, there's a lot of noise, and it's difficult to cut through the noise, and it's difficult to cut through the promises, right? You've got a lot of different companies today promising great things, but they're, depending on the organization, that potentially if you're going to kind of buy some software, right? Who's actually kind of good in the market and what's their track record, because it's difficult to cut through the noise. So I've spent a lot of time really kind of evaluating the market. And for me to categorize, I can see three main components of how AI is really kind of helping in the recruiting activities. All right, so I'll just break it down for everyone. So number one, you've got assistive AI. So this is where kind of the chat GPTs kind of launched, et cetera. And ultimately, assistive AI is helping us writing job descriptions, a few focus areas, a few question banks. There's some note taking during the interviews, such as like MetaView or BrightHire or some other kind of components like that. And ultimately, just being assistive for us as we try and improve kind of hiring practices, right? Then the next component is from assistive, you then start to have selective, right? So selective AI is helping you start to make kind of better decisions on maybe who to interview. So for us, we've started to work with AI on the CV review, right? Last year we had something like 1.3 million applications, which ultimately forced us in the direction of using kind of AI, because we were finding our candidate experience was pretty crappy, right? When you would apply for a role, and then it would, we at some points we had 70, 80,000 kind of applications that were kind of unread, right? And that was only a couple of weeks of application review. So from a candidate experience, it wasn't really that great. Selective AI is, for us, we're using it to make better decisions on who we should interview. So we've got bots, for instance, that start to help us kind of interview, start to help us select candidates through the process, right? You've also got other areas such as, HackerRank, or, for like the software engineering hiring, HackerRank, Codility, et cetera, who start to use AI through the kind of assessment kind of piece, right? But not making decisions, but helping you from a selection kind of basis. And then number three is you've got kind of predictive AI. Now, predictive AI is the most immature component of the three categories. So there is an opportunity for us to analyze historical data, which could be the candidate CV, it could be interview notes, it could be scorecards and feedbacks, ultimately tries to identify patterns of successful kind of past hires, predictive hires, in order to make or try to make kind of better hiring decisions, not taking away the human component of the hiring process. But we've seen early indications where AI is able to flag if, for instance, you plug in MetaView feedback of the interview, so maybe transcripts of the interview, and being able to ascertain the difficulty ratings of kind of questions, and then being able to plug that through. Those are the three main components. I'm sure we'll come on a little bit later to how we're actually kind of using some of these areas. But in general, assistive, selective, and predictive are the three main categories that we're starting to kind of see and pay attention to.
And then obviously when you sort of look at those three things, in terms of actual adoption, the first one, assistive is the biggest category. I'm going to get smaller as you go down. I guess my question is, because I'm a heavy user of technology, so how do you set up? I guess you can talk about tools. How you mentioned earlier that you a couple of tools, but how would you go about sort of making sure that recruiters can actually get it right?
Yeah, and this is the big problem on assistive, because both candidates and interviewers have equal or somewhat equal access to assistive AI. So we're finding that candidates are, preparing for the interview. What are the types of questions I'm going to be asked during this? Copy and pasting the job description into kind of a chat GPT, and then getting formulated kind of questions and formulated answers. So for us, the enablement of being able to dig deeper and not just kind of have those surface level responses. Hey, that's a great interview response. Yes, I'll give some extra kind of points to that. You really need to dig a lot deeper and actually start to, make sure that your enablement strategy of interviewing is the same, because again, not all interviewers, I'm sure the whole group knows this, not all interviewers are created equal. There's some good interviewers and some not good interviewers. So this is actually the real challenge of being able to truly assess the candidate. And I think also like some organizations probably struggle with making a clear distinction of do they actually value AI within their organization, and therefore should their recruiting practices stand up to it? I think some people are like, yes, I actually like it when a candidate is using AI during the process, or the other side, no, I think it's cheating and I should remove that candidate, or somewhere in the middle where you haven't defined a clear strategy of the use of AI during the recruiting process. You've then got different opinions that will go left and right either way, and it won't create a consistent hiring experience.
But I think the real opportunity from a recruitment standpoint is that, sure, I mean, someone can cheat, or they can cheat on their resume. Obviously, that's easy, but or they can somehow cheat on the actual interview. But if you have the capability of AI to analyze different sources of data from that person, whether it be the CV, the interview, maybe a case study, all of these different things collectively, you should be able to analyze that. And I think you should do a pretty good job at cutting through some of the cheating.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we partner with MetaView, for instance, so we're able to record all of the interviews, and then we're able to then summarize the responses, and we're able to see, to what extent that candidate is truly being kind of tested. And then if it works or doesn't work during this process, this is why kind of quality of hire is like, if now more than ever, really important, because if you're finding that your interviewing practices, so what skills do you assess, when do you assess, how do you assess, who should assess, and how do you enable the group in order to be successful to predict successful outcomes, you need now more than ever to have that data retrospectively to be able to look back, to be able to say, are our interviewing practices and processes able to predict future outcome of a successful hire? And then if you don't have, the degree of scorecards, interview notes, be able to retrospectively kind of look back and see how you truly evaluated that candidate, then, some of those organizations, I think it's going to be quite challenging to truly know, and back into that quality of hire metric that we all want to crave.
But you're using MetaView to support you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we use it, and I think it's a good tool. There's others kind of out there, but I think for me, it's really important to get the quality and consistency of the interviewing kind of notes, right? And but we use MetaView.
Okay. And there are lots of other tools out there. Obviously, I think the important thing is that the actual hiring process, need to be, fully fleshed out, and the tools are just to support that. I think it's safe to say that if your data sucks and your process is broken, then it can't work, right? And so the tool is not going to save you. Okay. All right. So let's shift gears, just a little bit here. I just want to, obviously, a lot of people always ask me about, okay, so what organizations out there that are doing something that are leading the way. So can you maybe talk through that? I mean, obviously, Deel is, doing some stuff, and maybe talk about that. But are there others as well?
Yeah, so I think it depends what category you're starting to look at and the maturity state of that organization, right? So I think that you've obviously got like a lot of the standard companies that everyone kind of tends to kind of reference, right? When you look at kind of raising hiring standards and all of these things, like obviously big tech is kind of out there, but there's some other really great organizations that maybe focus on different things, maybe focus on cultural values, maybe focus on skills evaluation, et cetera, et cetera. I think if I look at it from a future perspective, a lot of organizations, we're just changing everything, right? So if you think about how AI is happening in kind of TA, then if I think about Deel, for instance, the historic norm of a sales development representative to an account executive should be changing, because the SDR group have access to AI in order to do more outreach and in order to, write email templates and all of these things. And then when you look at, some of the back office functions, like you've got your chatbots and all of these things in customer support. So the historical rate of how you actually assign headcount to different groups is dramatically changing. And we're at the forefront of, headcount planning and approval processes and all of these things in order to the requisition gets requested to us. And sometimes those historical rates may or may not make sense in terms of the distribution of kind of headcount. So I think that's a key challenge that I don't think any organization has really kind of got there yet. So I think you start to see a lot of kind of layoffs and things like that. To what extent, are they going to bring people back, or is that the right kind of distribution curve? In terms of like best practices, I typically tend to see that a lot of groups in TA, I think it's less than like 3% of like real kind of TA groups across the board really diving in to AI. I think it's very much an very early adopter community at this point. So I think with that, there's not necessarily the maturity of like best practices. And I think there's a little bit of reservation. So yeah, I think that, there's like less than 2-3%, I would say, that are really kind of leaning into kind of best practices using AI at this point. So that creates a big opportunity, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that there are companies, that are doing snippets, right? So I say snippet because, they're using like AI for certain parts. So
Yes.
for example, Unilever, for example, which is a global company, obviously, I mean, they've been using video interviews and gamified assessments, right? To be able to reduce time to hire globally, right? So they're able to tailor a lot of these things for regional differences. So as I mentioned earlier, I think that is a huge benefit, because I mean, if you're sitting in England or Canada and you're hiring people all over the world, unless you've actually worked in those marketplaces, it's going to be really difficult, for you to be bang on from a sort of candidate experience. So then you leverage AI that can actually help you make sure that you're relevant to the Indian marketplace or the Chinese marketplace, whatever it is. So that's what they've been doing, and they've seen a massive production spike. Time to hire dropped by 75%. So, other ones are, obviously using AI, like Zapier, for example. They're using AI just to analyze, resumes, globally as well, and project.
I mean, I can tell you a little bit about what we're doing here, because we've seen some amazing results, right? So so for those of you, AI at the CV review has three main things, right? So it's firstly application review to sort between, who fits certain criteria for the job, who doesn't, right? Then you've got a database search. So that same criteria then goes onto your database, where it could be that someone's applied for a full stack engineering role and they're really a front ender or back ender, right? Or the role has been opened and closed. Someone's applied within the first 150 applications. They've kind of got the job. And then for people that are like 300 application, they haven't really got a shot, right? So you're able to then look at like the database search, actually comb through who's relevant. So that can increase time to hire, right? Or decrease it rather. And then the third is you've got kind of outbound bots as well. And then for us, how we tailor these bots is we put together like target profiles. This could be past examples of great hires that we've done, or target profiles that we want to attract to our organization. You've then got the job description and competencies. And then thirdly, you've got the unsaid things that you're looking at the job description on ideal job title or bullseye companies or bullseye industries. So for us, if we're running payroll, I don't know who the payroll companies are in Japan. And it's very difficult if we're hiring in 120 plus countries for somebody who works in payroll. It's impossible for my recruiting team to know, apart from the global or US players or kind of high level EMEA players, who's actually, in the payroll organizations in kind of, in Japan, right? It's really difficult. So all of that we've then plugged in, and what we've actually started to see is a couple of things. So number one is like recruiter screens to hire ratio have gone down. So in Q1 for our software engineering team, for instance, we were at 16 recruiter calls to one hire. And then within the first 3 months of applying AI, that's dropped to 12 to 1. But when we think about that and we're hiring, when we first started to use AI, we were hiring 200 people a month, and with no increase of headcount within the TA team, we've actually risen that to 300. So 33% improvement, and our time to hire on average has gone from, 46 days on average across all of our roles to 31 days. So a dramatic improvement. And we've also moved our candidate experience probably about a year ago, which was hovering on 16, 17, plus 16, 17 on the NPS to plus 48. So it's really huge. The volume, time, and quality of experience.
Yeah. I have a question on metrics, which we'll talk about later, but that's actually really good. I'm going to ask you because ultimately you've done a lot of really good things, leading the way and showing that you've been able to actually move the needle in a positive way. And that translates into dollars and cents, right? When you can shorten your time to hire, you can boost the productivity of your recruiter. I mean, that's huge. That's millions, right? So that's really, really interesting. Okay, so I just want to shift gears, just a little bit here. So this is, so I get asked this question often. So what's next? I mean, we're sort of in the moment, and this is changing every other minute. But what's the future of AI in global hiring?
It will remain that you still have to. People work with people, and you can do assessments all you want with kind of AI, right? And who the best person is. But if they don't gel with the personality of the incoming team or team member, then it's just not going to work and people will lose trust. So it's very much a human-centric approach, but there will be supporting data points, and there'll be a number of new data points that we haven't previously had access to. So for me, the predictive part I came onto earlier, I don't believe in some organizations, I don't believe that a hiring manager will be able to make a hire without having access to predictive analytics of the likelihood of success. And they won't solely be able to make a hiring decision. They will, at some point, you will have a data source of predictive modeling to see if you want to progress and offer. So that's my prediction in some companies that are leaning very heavily into it. I think that this is the next frontier.
Do you think that the industry will trust it?
Depends in what way, because if you were to say that, okay, you're outsourcing the decision to AI, which by the way is against regulation, then if some companies over-index on, okay, well, AI has made this decision, and we shouldn't hire it. So unless you have a rebuttal, we're going to reject. You'll lose all confidence and trust. Because the moment that the AI says, this is going to be a great hire, and we work with humans, right? And then when that person doesn't kind of work out for whatever reason, could be a multitude of different reasons, then the hiring manager say, I don't trust it. This is a predictive hire. I didn't trust it. I went along with it. And now I'm just going to, get rid of it. Right. So it really depends on the implementation and the organizational approach to the evaluation and using AI in that evaluation process. So it really depends. You're going to see some mixed results, positive, some backlash.
Yeah, because I talked to someone last week about this, and they said to me, and the reason why I asked the question is because they were saying that the trust factor is the critical part because, people are very concerned about things like bias. Or obviously your data set, modeling has to be done correctly. We as users, we're not technical.
So right, we've all got biases already. So if I remember back to my Uber days, we were hiring, for want of a better term, an engagement manager from McKinsey to come into our operations team or general management, and that was 33% of all of our GMs, right? Or if not more. So there was a ton of talent cloning that already kind of exists. Is that a form of bias, right? And then if you were to say, a number of different areas. So actually, I think that there's a lot of possibility to level the playing field using technology. So I actually think that, and especially where platforms like Deel, for instance, if you're really able to increase the application rate and access to talent by default, you have a wider pool, and therefore, if you're able to use AI in an efficient and effective way in order to identify the right people that is meritocratic I believe your quality of hire will rise. I believe your access to talent will rise as a result of that. Your speed of delivery will reduce because you're not having to staff recruiting in such a human capital way that it costs you way too much than what you were doing, dealing with those manual processes of CV review, scheduling more interviews, all of these things. If you can truly identify the right candidate for the job and you have a broad exposure to multi-markets, then for me, I think that creates a level playing field. And not only for a software engineer, 5 years ago, you have to be in San Francisco, right? And then, or 10 years ago, you have to be in San Francisco. And then you started to see folks moving to Austin. You started to see like all of these other areas start to kind of pop up, but you still have to be in those locations. And if you're actually going to say, hey, actually, we're able to hire anywhere, and start to create those areas and actually remove some of the logistical and country borders to hiring, and make it easier to be able to hire in different locations, I think you'll be able to increase your talent density.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. My single prediction is a little bit different. Mine is you are going to start to see a tighter connection, between recruiting and then employee performance. So what I mean by that is, you will be able to see, okay, so we've hired somebody and measure their output as an employee, and then you can feed that back into your hiring predictive model. Because as you were saying, the idea to really hone in on that profile of your strike candidate. So I think you're going to start to see a tighter relationship between talent attraction and then the rest of the employees.
I do agree. I think that it's always difficult because recruiting don't own the hiring decision, right? So we select people through the hiring practice. Sometimes recruiters get frustrated where they think this is the best candidate, and then we select another candidate, or they're not active in the process, and the hiring team kind of make a selection on who they want to hire through a referral, for instance. So we don't own the hiring, what I do think, I do concur with your agreement. So we've developed a framework at Deel called RISE, right? To raise hiring standards. And RISE is ultimately an acronym for we recruit an inspired workforce that stay and excel. And those are all of our 4 metrics. So from a recruitment side, and obviously you've got your time to hire, your volume of hire, et cetera, all of your standard metrics that we're typically judged on. Then the inspire piece is on candidate experience, but also kind of new joiner surveys, right? Are we hiring a motivated workforce? And the stay metrics around retention, et cetera, et cetera. And then you've got your Excel metrics, which ultimately links to quality of hire. And did our evaluation process identify folks that we believe can rise and shine through our organization for the years to come? So I think that I have experienced a lot of resistance actually within the TA team of like, well, hey, we didn't make the hiring decision, and yet you're judging us on if they're motivated and inspired to come and do a job versus just coming and doing a job versus wanting to work here, right? How do we control that? How do we control if their onboarding experience or their manager's a bit crappy, right? And they stay. But it's not on the individual basis, but it's on the kind of the wider data set. And if you can move the numbers up. So I think we're the guardian of the process, and we need to make sure that we refactor all of those things into our hiring processes to be able to create predictable outcomes, but holding the mantra of, well, this person, you've hired 5 people this month, and 6 months later, 2 of those people left, is a really small data set to kind of judge truly performance. So I think it's a difficult one, I think.
Yeah, I think I've been an HR leader, so obviously I've had the TA underneath me, and then I've had HR business partners and all that kind of stuff. So, but I think what I'm getting at here is we're so used to the blame game, but if you have you're focused on data and bringing data back, then it's not about the blame game anymore. It's about, okay, so how do we make this data better, right? Or how do we change our flow? So that's why I have a question about the meta view. So talking about, predictive. So after you've hired somebody, that person starts to work, they're an employee. Are you able to take all of those data points and put it back into MetaView so that when you do hire for that role again, you've got a better data set, possibly?
Yeah, see, ultimately you have to think about what connection points you want within that, right? So you've got your CV, right? You've got your interview feedbacks, you've got the wider transcript. Interview acts for us in two ways. So we actually don't use our applicant tracking system to complete feedbacks. We actually go in, we use MetaView, there's an API integration, and we customize those scorecards. So for instance, when we're looking at a back-end like scorecard, we've customized all of the main skills that we want on the scorecard. And then so when we go to MetaView, it then shapes all of the questions and what's been asked at any point in time during that interview process into the same interview format. And then we push the scorecard into our applicant tracking system. That creates standardization. So for our CTO, he loves it because he's evaluating fairly and looking at every single scorecard versus kind of differentiated kind of notes, or this is the question, this is the answer. So being able to really create that standardization. And then when we think about functional skills, practices, behaviors, motivations, etc., we then have a scoring and rating system with clear definition of what soft yeses are, and the variance of like all the different yeses that we see. So I think that for us is good. It's not a tool for us where we use it as an analytical model because we want performance ratings and quality of hire surveys. So we do a survey month 1, month 3, and month 6. So based on this hiring criteria, would you make the same decision again in hiring this person? And then you've got the gradients of yeses and nos. And then what you're able to do is ascertain, okay, well, if it's because of functional skills, what was our interviewing practices that gave us a strong yes for functional skills, whereas actually the gap is a little bit different. So what we're actually doing is we're building that internally. So we're able to plug in all of our ATS data, to be able to plug in our MetaView data, like the full transcript, and also the performance data to give us a clear picture of quality of hire ultimately. It's still very early and we're still seeing if the model is working or refining or refactoring or all of these things. The early indications are pretty interesting. We're getting some very interesting analysis from it. Do I think it's fully built? No, but I'm enjoying the process.
Yeah. And I think that the general message here, that's the message really, is to sort of give this a go and try this out. And I think you demonstrated that. So I just want to move on to our next question is really around, you kind of talked a bit about this. Obviously, AI is a game changer. It's powerful. There's something that you can talk about from a change point of view, because humans hate change, right? But this is something that I believe that you have to venture into. So how would you tell people that are sort of on the fence as to how they can navigate this?
You're not going to please everyone all of the time. And, it comes through to that early adoption curve, right? So if you've got people that are kind of, middle of the market, don't try to kind of convince them that this is a good idea, because they're just going to come with like questions of, well, this won't work because of X, or my preposition is X, Y, Z. So it's just going to create a lot of resistance. What we've actually done was just tried to get, especially within like the TA team, firstly, we wanted to identify, my TA team's about 50, like recruiters, about 50, 52, 53 recruiters, right? And so we tried to identify 5 or 6 people that really wanted to kind of use the AI tools, set them up as power users, and then give it a quarter, and then show the rest of the team, hey, this is the benchmarks. These are how we're driving success, and actually kind of see it working, right? Versus trying to just deploy it everywhere. And then that's the same for our hiring committees, right? And hiring teams. Some of the folks, hey, like, we want to do this experiment. Are you open to, we believe our prediction is this. We want to prove it out and use this as a test case in order to then showcase to the rest of the leadership team to get them kind of on board and get those early results in before we do a mass deployment. And then you learn and you kind of figure it out, so it becomes better and better and better over time. So we really just went for like, how can we improve numbers with a very small subset, get them really motivated and championing. So then when we bring like the mass market into it, then you've already got those champions and those buddies that you're able to say, hey, they can help you. versus everyone going through the same learning journey together.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. I mean, obviously from a change management point of view, you always start small, and then test it and then, try to get buy-in that way. So I think that obviously is a very good thing to do. I think a lot of people try to go too big and, become very overwhelming, and it gets shut down quickly.
Well, what we saw actually so we had some assumptions when we were shipping MetaView, for instance, which are like, candidates aren't going to want to have their interviews going to record it. And so we have like opt out at various stages of the process. So when we send, hey, come for a recruiter screen, right, we use MetaView. This is what MetaView is. If you'd like to opt out, please click this button. Then they turn up for the interview. They then have another reminder to say, hey, if you would like to opt out, please click this button. It doesn't affect your candidacy whatsoever. And we found that less than 1%, it wasn't even around 1%, it was like a fraction of 1% actually did it from the candidate side. So we were like, wow. And then when we looked at our interviewers, our interviewers were showing the most amount of resistance. Internally, the interviewers didn't want to do it. And actually what we identified was when we spoke to those folks to say, hey, like, why don't you want to, use these interviews? These are all benefits. It just turned out it's just an enablement thing, which was, I don't want people looking at how bad an interviewer I potentially am. So actually, if you can give me a bit of interview coaching, and that was a great opportunity for us because we didn't realize these folks, they didn't put their hand up to say, hey, it was actually just like, I don't want other people to watch my interviews, I'm really bad at them. Or they felt that others would perceive them as being really bad at interviewing. So that was a great opportunity for us to actually identify those folks. And then we gave them extra training and support. And they were like, great. And then they realized, which is the other swing state, is if you can go and watch other interviewers, that's a great way of actually kind of learning how people are doing it in a live environment versus going into, recruiting interview training and doing kind of theoretical things and then role plays and all of that stuff. And one other thing that was really valuable, didn't think I was going to notice, it was for the recruiters, they would go and watch the hiring manager interview, and then they would see what questions they were asking and then repeat those questions during the interview process. And then we found that, we were filtering out better candidates, and we were filtering out more candidates through that process. And the hiring team weren't having to give more time to TA for calibration. That calibration piece was already kind of happening. And then the hiring managers loved it because we would send snippets of the interview to the hiring team to say, hey, this is my interview. Is this a good answer? I don't know. And then sending it to the hiring team is like a 2-minute snippet. And then the hiring manager's like, I love this. This is really great. This is game changing. So that actually prevented that flywheel from like, this is really great. We love what the.
So you just talked about a lot of different things, but it demonstrated that you need to be agile and flexible and treat this like an ongoing process, basically. Yeah. And I think that is actually really, really smart. And that's how you get a lot of buy-in, because you're starting to get quick wins and you get people saying, yeah, okay, let's so keep going. Right. Exactly. I just wanted to shift gear just a little bit because so when we're talking about metrics, you talked a little bit about this already. So are there a couple of really critical metrics that you tend to track when it comes to, global?
So at a broad level, OKRs are around RISE. So recruiting metrics. So we've got, pace to goal. Ultimately, you've got your time to hire and all of these things, which are like leading or lagging indicators. But the number one OKR is we need to hire 600 people this quarter. Did we do it? Right. And then the breakdown per function. So that's one area. And the next is on Inspire. So Inspire for us is candidate experience, right? We want to get to plus 50 on the candidate experience. We'll update that as we go more into people that we hire motivated to do their job. Right now it's on candidate experience, but it will probably shift to, are we hiring a motivated workforce? Then you've got your 20%, kind of churn rate. This is where we want to be. We're below that, but that's our churn rate and our OKR. And then you've got Excel. So Excel is 85% of all hires, we would make the same hiring decision again and hire this person at the 3-month mark. So it's quite ambitious, actually, when you think about it. Of 85% of all hires that we do would make the same hiring decision at the 3-month mark. That's what we're going for. And then one of the things, my favorite KPI, not OKR, but KPI, is recruiter calls to hire ratio. That for me is such a leading indicator because it shows if we're calibrated or not calibrated. It shows if there's going to be problems historically in hiring. Is that because we're being too selective and too rigid on all of the skills that we're looking for? So that recruiter call to hire ratio, I always look at.
And you can so what you talked about, this is more of a global thing, but you can segment based on region, obviously, and I think you'll have some that are way high and then way low, or and then that allows you to be able to be really targeted, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, we find in LATAM, for instance, it's a little bit higher, mainly because of not because of skills and ability. It's actually because of language skills. And I mean, everyone's kind of speak English kind of proficiently. In Europe is a little bit better. Obviously, in the US is great, right? But that's not necessarily a problem. But our business language is English, and then it kind of varies and fluctuates. When you start to go to kind of the APAC region, then we have to it's not the same job criteria. So for payroll compliance, for instance, there's not necessarily the abundance of talent in APAC as to what there is in kind of North America, for instance.
Right. So then you should be, having different types of metrics, like same metric, but different sort of levels of standard based on the region, which I think is sort of where you're sort of getting at.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. All right. So that's excellent. We talked a lot about the great benefits of going global. When it comes to hiring, we talked about AI, we talked about metrics for change. But one thing is that when you do open up your market from, say, one region to the world, it'll just start to pop up, right? And so, how do you manage global hiring at scale? Are there certain things that you have seen that have popped up as core challenges, and then what have you done to sort of manage stuff?
Yeah, I mean, compensation, for instance, how do you kind of level the role? There's big opportunities, right? If you're going to emerging markets and you're not having to pay the same salaries, right? But to what extent are you in the 50th, 60th, 80th percentile of the market, the local market? And then do you want to go above that because you're making a net cost saving between a US salary, for instance, and moving into kind of EMEA or Middle East, Africa, LATAM, to what extent, where do you want to be? So I think that compensation is kind of a bit of a struggle. Then you've got kind of a cultural dynamic, right? And then you've also got, employment legislation. So to what extent is there probation periods? People are always surprised in the Netherlands, for instance, where, you can't, it's not at will, right? You give if you give an indefinite contract, you have to go through a court process if the person isn't willing to sign a settlement agreement. So you've got all of this all of this regulatory kind of challenge, and it's really difficult to just ascertain where should you go, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, being in Canada here, so we fit that bill. We have probably one of the most stringent employment laws for all of our provinces here. So yeah, so definitely a challenge. But what happened with respect to volume, right? Say you're hiring for a software developer and your company is based in Toronto. And in the past, you would focus on the greater Toronto area. Now you go global and all of a sudden you start getting this dealing with massive volume. So how do you deal with that?
Well, it's tough, right? I think historically, I can only speak a little bit about Deel in this area. So, for instance, we've got our team members in 115 countries around the world. So, from a recruiting perspective, it's really hard. What are the local benefits? How do I present this offer? Right? And I think that's pretty tough. When you look at if you have a huge amount of volume of applications, and then you're saying, okay, well, I'm going to interview 8% of all applications that have come in. Depending on the size of your TA team, makes it kind of difficult to scale because you're going to have to add talent, add recruiting resource. It's going to cost you a lot, right? And then for the saving of kind of salaries, depending on the volume that you're doing, it's, is it worth it? That's where I think AI comes in a little bit more. Like that's the road that we've gone down. But listen, I do think if you're smart in your approach and you start to create, depending on the volume that you're hiring, start to create kind of pods in different locations and different reasons, in different areas, then I think, don't just hire one or two people in a country and just kind of spread it away. Like start to create kind of pods and teams of folks that for us, they work in the same time zone, whilst there's regional kind of nuances between kind of cultures, actually, we're in an international environment. So from those perspectives, it's really kind of worked out quite well for us at least.
I want to really get into questions. So I think we've covered everything. Does anybody have any questions for Alan or I? Please use the Q&A feature. I do have some questions here. So, but I want to open it up to the group to see what, if you have any questions. So if anyone has any questions that they want to ask, now is your opportunity.
If you've got a question or if you just left your microphone on.
Okay, so I didn't hear the question, but I see something in the chat. All right, so Nick, the leading indicator you mentioned is recruit to hire ratio, right?
It's a recruiting screen to hire ratio. So how many calls per role does someone need to do in order to make a hire?
So I didn't hear that. Alan, did you hear?
Yeah, so it was just a question of, so if I'm hiring a salesperson in general, how many recruiter calls do I have to do to make a hire? Right, that's basically the answer. That's what he wanted clarification on.
Okay. Are there any other questions? So while you're thinking about the questions, I do have one actually. So Alan, this is just a question that I have. So what is one country or region that you think is currently underrated when it comes to talent, and why?
I'm not sure if I think it's widely known. I think Brazil in software engineering, fantastic. It's I shouldn't really be saying it because this is where we're hoovering up a lot of talent, right? For software engineering. But Brazil is, it's widely known, but I didn't quite realize the true talent density of Brazil. It is different to like Mexico or Argentina or other places. Like the density of software engineering talent in Brazil is fantastic. For software engineers in Brazil. And that to me was like, wow, this is like, Brazil is fantastic.
And I think the other one too for me is the Philippines, which I think is widely known as well. But I think people underestimate.
It's really good. There's a lot of back office there, right? And we've got a big back office center, and they also mirror US hours. So from a cultural perspective, you can get mirroring hours in Philippines. It's that's also really good. Yeah.
Okay, I don't see any other questions, but I'm going to just move on to the next question. So, so this is a really interesting one. You talked about this too. This is what I am a huge believer in. So what is the number one thing that a recruiter can do to ensure a great candidate experience when we're hiring across time zones and cultures?
I think I'm going to answer this question in kind of two ways. Firstly, what can leaders of TA do in order to give recruiters the resources in order to provide a great candidate experience? It all comes down to time. If you have more time, then you're able to, like if you're thinking about the recruiter's day and where they're spending time on CV reviews, on recruiter calls, on scheduling interviews, on offer management and offer processes, all of these things, think about all of your recruiters and being like, okay, where are they spending most time and what are the activities do I want them to do? So firstly, I want recruiters being able to do the calls, right? And then phone candidates up after they've got midway through the process and gather their, and if I can't, and what normally happens is if you don't have too much time, you're not able to provide and hop on calls with candidates after interviews because you're so focused on your metrics of how many calls have I done, right? So I think if you can really get all of your recruiting teams, give them more time, they will have the opportunity to deliver great candidate experience. Then for like, if I'm speaking to a recruiter, be organized and have certain segments of your day dedicated to certain tasks. Where I see recruiters fall down in my team is if their day is unstructured. Typically that's correlated with a lower candidate experience. And then make it fun and kind of measure it and put it against your real goals, and don't just don't celebrate someone's made hires, really call out the candidate experience, and then they'll start to care more about it. So having a structured day will then be like, okay, well, I'm doing my calls at this time, I'm doing my CV reviews at this time, I'm doing my offer management. And if you've got a clean applicant tracking system that's well organized, I guarantee those recruiters are the ones delivering high-grade candidate experience. So for the messy recruiters where they haven't reviewed the CVs in a week, 10 days, if 2 days later they still haven't scheduled that interview, because they've just fallen off their to-do list and haven't got an organized to-do list, then guaranteed those are the recruiters that aren't providing a great candidate experience.
Do I want to add just one other thing to what I did a lot of, which is it's very important for recruiters and hiring managers to really understand what the cultural norms are in these parts of the world. Okay, so I'll give an example. So I used to live in Vancouver, and I was born and raised in Vancouver, and so there's a very large Asian population. And so it's actually considered rude when Asians talk to look at people's right in the eyes, and especially like if it's an elder, they look down. And so that in North American terms, general North American terms, that would be considered rude. But the idea is for recruiters to understand that is their sort of norm and, culturally. So I think it's really important that, and especially when you're using AI, but if you can train the AI to know those sort of cultural norms, then I think that is a huge positive.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Do any other questions? Before we finish off, I want to see if maybe Alan, getting started is always a challenge. So we talked a little bit about this. So what is the most important thing that a company should get right from day one? So when they're starting to hire globally, is there one thing that pops up?
Yeah, it really depends on the stage in which, if you're in one country and you want to go to kind of 2 or 3, or if you're just going to be agnostic and just open the whole world up, right? And be opportunistic in where you're hiring. So it really depends on what you're actually kind of trying to achieve. I think you mentioned kind of earlier, you've got different areas of, if you're hiring, so the Airbnb example, for instance, like a localization of products. If that's where you're looking to go, you need to kind of, you really need to think about the role type, work type, country, et cetera, and like, what are you trying to get out of it? Then if I think about, okay, well, if all that's kind of said and done, you really need to think about the legislation and getting a real partner who can really kind of help you through some of those pitfalls, challenges. You don't want to make too many mistakes along the way, especially if you're a startup and you've got a burn rate. Then you can't make too many of these mistakes. If you're a larger organization, you're going to have to do a lot more kind of change management than the startup, for instance. So it really just depends. Just identifying and making sure you've got the right partner that can scale with you and give kind of advice, either that's internally with a legal team or a finance team or HR team, or if you need a partner for that.
So this is where I can do a shameless plug for Deel, actually. So talking about a partner, Deel is that partner. I mean, if you are looking to venture out into the world of global hiring, obviously Deel is a fantastic partner. So on that note, there is a fantastic piece of content that Deel has, which is a guide to global hiring. You can download it here. I'll share it in the recap email tomorrow also. So, you can go ahead with that. Also, Alan, I just want to thank you for being here. I appreciate your time. I learned a lot too from this, and I hope everyone else did as well. Thanks for being here. I didn't see your daughter though.
No, she's well trained. She's got the iPad on downstairs. I'm a bad parent and just stuck her in front of. Do you know what's funny? Actually, there's one thing. The generation today, my daughter is grabbing my phone all of the time and putting it on camera, recording it, and she wants to be a YouTuber. At 6 years old. So it's like, this is the generation that we're going to be starting to hire in like 10, 12, 15 years or so, which is, when you think about the 12, 13-year-olds that are going to get to the workforce in like, 7, 8, 10 years, this is, we've got a lot of change.
There's a YouTuber that she's a teenager and she just retired because she's worth like $1 billion.
Yeah.
I forgot her name.
My daughter watches her. She's her inspiration. She's like, I love Nastia.
Yeah, that's probably who it is, right? this girl's like 15 years old and she's not even finished high school yet. Anyway, it's crazy. Okay, so I just want to thank you for being here. For everyone here, I will be following up tomorrow. So I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank Alan for being here. I want to thank Deel, obviously, the fantastic partner of mine. We run lots of different types of webinars, podcasts, and all that kind of stuff. So I hope you all learned something new from this. Alan, thanks for being here. And to all of you, have a great rest of your day.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for hosting, Jeff.